I'm actually going to expand today and show you the 6 important things. We're so pushed for time and resources. So today is going to be, because it's been recorded, it's just quite fortunate. I'm going to show you the 6 most key things that you need to do in a conversation. It's my opinion that if you don't do these, it doesn't matter how much information you have, how good your facts are, nothing will work. I see constantly, people, scientists versus scientists, making no headway in communication. So it's really not about intelligence. It's really not about the quality of information. It's about the psychology and understanding those deeper aspects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a slideshow. I'm going to have a couple of pauses in there to answer a few questions, just to ensure that everyone is really taking it in. But don't worry if you're not, because obviously it's been recorded, so you can, rewatch it and go through, and obviously you can email me. Right, I'm going to share my screen and let's get going. Okay, so how to handle difficult conversations. Okay, let's start with a story. This was really very early on in the pandemic. I had posted on social media that I didn't think masks were effective. I'd seen enough studies to question their efficacy and also the problems that they would cause in learning and communication. I then had a friend, Kevin, post this meme. If we look at it, many of you would have probably seen it. The first picture, it's pretty crass as well, but the first picture is pretty much saying if 2 people are standing naked, one person urinates, the other person's going to get wet. The second picture says if you wear trousers, you're going to get less wet. And then the third picture says if you're both wearing trousers, you won't get wet. And somehow that's justification for a face mask. So it's apples and oranges. But that doesn't matter to many people because metaphors are very, very powerful, and stories as well. These are the things that make a difference in communication. So my friend had posted this, and he's a really intelligent guy. And what happened was he really hadn't thought it through. So I didn't question him in the sense of I didn't argue, I didn't do many other things. I just said, but what happens if someone farts? Because my point was to disrupt the thought and sort of stay in communication. And we had a few messages back and forth. And then I saw him a couple of months later, and he came up to me and he said, oh my God, they were lying about everything. And it was really, and I said, well, what did it for you? He said, well, on that interaction, I looked at a few of your posts and really I looked into it, and then I just could see everything. Now, if I would have tried to argue with Kevin and trying to, justify my position or whatever, he would have hung on to his position even stronger. And we have many instances like this story. There's a number of dog walkers that I've spoke to where they didn't take the second or third or whatever, and they're very grateful now because all their friends are constantly getting sick. So it's really about understanding what works and what doesn't work in communication. And what you'll find is it's not really what we think it is. It's very interesting. And we're going to look at those today, the top 6 things. A couple of key points before we get going. As humans, we tend to externalize the problem. Now, sometimes it will be true. The problem is externalized in that someone is doing something to us or someone's being a tyrannical leader, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is with externalizing the problem is we lose all the power. And we don't want to do this in communication, because if we externalize a problem in communication, we say, oh, that other person's not listening because they're stupid or they're a sheep or whatever. And that's really leads us down to a dead end. So the thing is, it could be true. They could be stupid, they could be ignorant, all those things, but it doesn't help the problem. What we want to do is we want to use this next sentence as our base. And it says, the meaning of the communication is the response you get. So if someone gets angry, we've triggered that anger, okay? The anger might be in response to something that we've said that's completely true. However, getting the anger as a response is not practical. So we need to find a different way. So it's really the mindset is to say, okay, whatever we're doing is creating the response. If we want something different, we need to create a different stimulus. And that's the key point. It's going to take lots of practice and courage. Pretty much everyone here already has the courage, and it's just to practice the elements of what we're going to look at today. And it's not easy. I mean, people have been so manipulated. And presentation of data that contradicts their belief system mostly fails. And we're going to look at why this is. And effectively, all you're going to get yourself into is playing a game of table tennis. And really today, we've got a limited time. We're going to dip our toes in. It's going to be a bit of a brain dump. But as I said, it's been recorded. You can go through it multiple times. We've got a YouTube channel with many, many videos to look into a lot of this information at depth. We are quite strained with resources on the project. We've got a lot more content we want to get out there, but we can only do it. There's only so many hours in the day. Okay, so a little brief introduction about the project. There's 3 pillars as was just introduced. Conversations, how to have a good conversation. This isn't how to influence someone. Yes, influence will be important in understanding that, but it's about creating a conversation where the truth will arise. That's what it's about. Two-way street, listening, speaking, all that. It's a good conversation. How to message, it's really important. Most of the flyers are academically brilliant, but not effective because the government doesn't really worry about facts. It's worrying about influencing people. And of course, we need to understand and behave and how we're influenced if we're going to communicate well. So reaching people is like traversing an obstacle course, okay, in today's climate. However, we have a blindfold on. And the purpose of today's presentation is to take the blindfold off and show you the obstacles. When you know the obstacles, then you can start to traverse them. And when you learn to traverse them well, then you will have very good conversations. So the obstacle course looks like this. We have number 1, not triggering shutdown. If you trigger shutdown in someone, there is no conversation. You're now in an argument. The rational mind is shut down. You are now talking to a gorilla. Number 2, emotions. We have to learn to manage our emotions. If I had £1 for every time someone said to me, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, but I got angry and I couldn't remember anything. This is what happens in the brain. It's not personal to you. When we get emotionally triggered, the rational part of the mind shuts down and we lose access to that information. We are really just in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we really have to manage, resolve, and learn to understand emotions. Emotions, in my opinion, looking at all of this in all of my years of study, is the number 1 way that the public are manipulated. If they cannot manipulate the emotions, they wouldn't be able to do anything. So fear, guilt, shame, all of these things are the triggers and the drivers for manipulating the public. Number 3, we've got to avoid divide dynamics. If 2 people consider themselves on opposite side of a viewpoint, they will not listen to the other person. They dismiss all their information. So if you don't overcome this, people will not listen. Number 4, pushy salesman. And that's really that evangelical approach. You know, when you walk into a shop and someone's just too eager, you walk away. And by the way, we've all done that. I mean, I've done that more than most. But when you cultivate a calm attitude, people listen much better. Number 5, cognitive dissonance. We will explain what that is and how to get around it. And then show, don't tell. You pretty much can't tell people many things, but you can get to the point where you can show them. When you show them and they can see, that's when they will update their model of the world. So this really is what we're traversing. And of course, with the, and most of the things is what not to do. And of course, once we get here, then we can start focusing on what to do. So in avoiding the divide dynamics, we want to get to common ground. In avoiding pushy salesmen, we're going to be calm. Cognitive dissonance, we're going to know how to present information. In show, don't tell, we're going to tell stories, metaphors, and we're going to be able to point people to information. Okay, so that is how the obstacle course looks. So some key points before we get going. People will say, I'm just going to speak my truth. Absolutely. Never say do anything else. But we have to learn it to speak it in such a way that the person can hear, because at the moment they're not hearing. It's not fair. Okay, let's just get this one out of the way. The fact is, the way things have gone the last few years, it's not fair. The fact that we have to look into this at depth to understand why someone else is being irrational, not listening, is not fair because they're not planning on doing it. But would you swap places? And I'm pretty sure that no one would. No one would take to be unaware of the issues that we face. So it's really a burden and a gift at the same time. And we really just have to allow, okay, it's not fair, but we've got to find a way to communicate. Really, people have been heavily manipulated beyond their awareness. People aren't aware just how much They have been influenced, how they've been manipulated, and how easy it is to do those things. It really is. The behavioral scientists I work with literally won't watch the news. They know that you can't protect your unconscious mind from those sorts of videos. So if they are interested in what's going on, they read it. It's much easier to protect your unconscious mind when you're reading something. And of course, we just have to start. As we said, it takes lots of practice. So we've really got to keep practicing. That's the only way we get good. So where are we? Current situation. Okay, here's our characters that we're going to look at today. We've got Jane blogs on the left and we've got Joe blogs on the right. Okay, Jane doesn't believe the narrative. She knows there's lots of things that don't make sense. She's questioning everything. Joe is really believing everything that's been said. He's following the science, so-called. And of course, what's happened is that they're having challenges in their communication. Jane will present a fact, and what will happen is that it will just bounce back more often than not. So what's going on? So what's going on effectively is a lot of the time this thing called the polarity of beliefs. Because they have opposing views, what happens is when you present your opposing view, it just bounces back. And what happens is it's not that it brings people closer to the middle. When you present information that's contrary to what the other person believes, it pushes them further apart. So we have to understand why this works and how to get around it. It's very key. But if you push against something, it will defend. So in fact, what you want to do is you want to gently undermine it to show that it's not on any solid ground. So what we do in a conversation, we stand on a soapbox. A soapbox is a metaphor for our unconscious mind, representing all the reservoir of information and knowledge, memories, opinions, belief systems, all of these things. And then what we do, and what we can't really avoid doing, is that we project that into the conversation. If you believe 2 and 2 equals 5, everything in the conversation around that concept will be 2 + 2 = 5. And what will happen is that very often people do not look in their own soapbox, and that's very key. And if you actually find a way, and it is quite straightforward to do it, to get them to look in their own soapbox, they realize that there's not much in there in terms of a lot of these subjects. And if you look into an article, and I can send this to you guys, it's called The Illusion of Explanatory Depth. Most people get their information from the media. So in fact, they've only got summary, they've got conclusions. They don't have any substance to them, but they're under the illusion that they do. And that's the problem that we face, that most people spouting the nonsense are absolutely sure that it's true. So if we look at this in a little bit more detail, same characters, we look at their soapboxes, not only do we project what we believe into the conversation, but we also interpret through our own individual lenses. Now, these are 2 magnifying glasses. Now, what we do is we put a fact in front of Joe. Now, Joe's going to see the fact uniquely through his own window to the world, through his own glasses. And it's only when we look into that box to see what are the glasses made of that things start to make sense. If we don't do this, nothing will make sense, because we're seeing everything from our unique perspective. So we need to see it from somebody else's perspective. So if we look at Joe and we think Joe believes the media reports the truth, he doesn't think that it's just a bunch of corporations and advertising companies, which what the old media effectively is now. He thinks that the government serves him and they're there to provide for his needs and they're not a bunch of crooks. He thinks that science is really solid and it can't be influenced, and it's, you know, it's a group of geniuses sitting in a room that can say whatever they want. He thinks that if someone says something's safe, that it must be. There's enough sort of checks and balances in the system. He trusts the institutions and he trusts there's enough oversight. He thinks there's a consensus. It's actually the illusion of consensus because it's manufactured, as manufactured consent is as well. So if somebody says, oh, so all the scientists in the world are wrong, that's pointing that he has an illusion there. If Pfizer did not release the data, how can there be a consensus? There can only be the Pfizer scientists who are obviously, you know, have conflicts of interest. So Joe is seeing things far different from reality, in my opinion, and probably most of yours, but it's really important to understand what he does see. Now, if he were to say, and we'll look at it on one of the later slides, if that was true, it would be on the news. He is under the illusion the media reports the truth. He is under the illusion that they will, if it's there, just report it. And that did happen some time ago, but no longer is the case. Now, Jane she knows there's a huge amount of censorship. So she knows she has to go looking for certain pieces of information. And if you were to look at Cheryl Atkinson's TED Talk on AstroTurf, not only is there huge amounts of censorship, but there's also huge amounts of self-censorship by the media that literally won't report on anything that will go against the corporation's profits. And to the point where they will understand everywhere that you will look for a piece of information and they will hijack it. So it really is, you have to go out your way to find what reality is. She knows there's conflicts of interest across the board, pretty much in all organizations now. She knows that non-government organizations have their grubby little fingers in many, many pies. She realizes media is a corporation. She distrusts the government. She's read a number of history books. And she knows that science is like any other industry and like any other human. We are vulnerable to influence. So now when you look at this and you put a fact there, say an article from the BBC, Joe and Jane are going to see that completely differently. Jane's probably going to laugh at it and Joe's going to think, oh, it's solid, you know, they're trustworthy. By the same token, Jane may put, say, a Substack written by a professor. Joe will Google him and it'll say anti-vaxxer. So, oh, that's nonsense. So we have to realize that delivery of the facts by just this raw thing won't work in many instances because no fact exists in a vortex. They are surrounded by hundreds of facts that give them meaning. So where do we make a huge difference? If we can provide information that undermines or changes these things in the soapbox. If Joe suddenly realizes, hang on a minute, I can't trust the media, that all changes. If Joe starts questioning, are these people really acting in my interest? They said it was safe, but if I look on, you know, I wouldn't advise going to Wikipedia because it's wrong about 90% of medical stuff. But as an example, on Wikipedia, if you look at all the drugs under the letter A, it fills a whole page that were withdrawn after years and years of safety testing. Okay, years and years of proper testing, and it was still after years after being prescribed shown to be wrong. So if anyone tells you they're 100% sure it's safe, they are either delusional or lying, because they can't be, and the humility is missing. But the propaganda knows that it has to pretend that it's 100% safe because people don't like ambiguity. Okay, so what happens is between Jane and Joe, and this will happen in, I would say, the majority of conversations, 90% plus, is people are playing table tennis. You present a fact, they bat it back. They present a fact, you bat it back. If you are in this dynamic, it's almost impossible to convince anyone. David Bohm wrote a brilliant book describing this called On Dialogue. And effectively, if you're in this dynamic, the game is to win a point. In order to win a point, you've got to dismiss the other person's and you've got to pretend yours is true. This dynamic is terrible. It's egocentric. If you watch any public debate from two political parties, it will undoubtedly be this dynamic, which is why I have never seen one side turn around and say, actually, the other gentleman is correct and I was wrong. You won't see that because the goal is not truth, the goal is election. And that's the problem in most of these things. So the dynamic of being in table tennis, once you spot it, stop. It's really key to understand that. So looking at the unconscious patterns, which we just touched on, was like, really do not question authority is what most of these people have in there. Trust is presented in the media, truth is presented, and science is, you know, scientism. So of course, these are the things we really need to overcome. So looking at now, we understand these different perspectives. And why does Joe believe what he believes? Because of the propaganda. People have had their grubby little fingers in Joe's soapbox, and Joe is not aware. He is not aware that he can be influenced without his consent or his knowledge. Okay, so we're going to move on to part A now. So we're going to look at Overton's window, and then we're going to look at the three foundational parts of communication, and then the three more advanced. So Overton's window is really, really key. We did a presentation on this a few weeks ago that can be found on our YouTube channel, but I'm just going to give you a sort of one-slide summary of it. Overton was a politician, and what he said was the window is what politics conditions to show you what you can and can't talk about. So what's in the window is acceptable, and what's outside the window is both absurd or crazy. So, or even radical. So what they do is they effectively box off what you can and can't talk about. So of course, you can't talk about vaccine harms, can you? You can't talk about all of these things because it's outside the window, or you're an anti-vaxxer the minute you talk about it. This is why the window needs to be moved. Now, the new normal was actually disrupting the old window and moving it. So effectively at the beginning, what happened was the two acceptable things were clapping and early treatment, but early treatment got taken off the table. You couldn't talk about it. It didn't exist, okay? And these absurd and crazy radical things suddenly came into the window. Pre-pandemic, these would pretty much be really. So what happened was, and obviously segregation was the classic, which the guys here, obviously you will know much about, is that what happened was that they removed early treatment from the window, and then they started expanding the window of what was acceptable to the point where you could literally abuse someone in a supermarket if they weren't wearing a mask. That was considered acceptable now, which is absurd and radical. So what the narratives will do and the media will do is they will move the window to make things acceptable. And this is what happens. And this is effectively is boiling the frog slowly. Now, why is this so important? Because if you want to talk about vaccines and other things, you need to move the window before you talk about it. And there's ways to do that. So I might say, well, science is about asking questions about anything. True? Yes. Okay, so we have to test all assumptions. Yes. So we have to test the vaccine assumptions. Okay, you got to move the window before you talk about things that are outside the window, because they are purposely moving the window, but you can actually move it back because what they're doing is not only illogical, it's completely crazy. So looking again at this is our obstacle course that we're traversing, let's first look at not triggering shutdown, emotions, elephant in the room, for me, the most important thing, and avoiding divide dynamics. And we're going to have a quick look at what drives Joe's behavior, because if we don't understand that, nothing really tends to make sense. So I'm just going to give you a sort of toe in the pond look at what's driving Joe's behavior. And we do understand this quite in depth now. And I'll give you two examples of how Joe's been manipulated. So here's a manipulation of the environment. So there's two ways you can be manipulated. They can manipulate what's outside of you, or they can manipulate what's inside your head. So in the environment, Joe fancies a coffee. Joe goes to the coffee shop and he's presented with three options. You remember when there was only two options? If there was only two options, people generally go for the small. When there's three options, people generally go for the medium. And that's what most people do as a sort of safety catch. I will just take the medium. What did the coffee companies do? They removed the small and they put an extra large in, and hey presto, they've sold a lot more coffee. And this is so, I've watched studies where they do this, but what's also starting, if they change the price of the middle one from £5 to £5.50, people then choose the large, because now the large seems the most value. So by manipulating what we see, they actually get us to change our decision. So there's actually a video which I want to briefly just show you one moment, because it's really kind of key. I'll just take one moment to find this.
Just so that you're aware, David, we cannot see your screen.
Oh, sorry, one moment. Yeah, you passed the test. Okay, here we go. Okay, what's going on there is what's known as split-second learning. And Matt Hudson's got a few articles on this. We learn a lot of the time by watching, okay, by watching those around us. So the dog instantly learns, okay, somebody else is falling over because of that, so that must be dangerous. Does anyone ever remember anyone else falling over dead in the pandemic? No, never happened, did it? But the first pictures that most people saw was of someone dropping dead in the street. Now, it looks like those were faked because the person puts their hands out, and you can't not put your hands out if you're conscious, okay? So it looks like it was staged. Now, why would someone stage it? Because the first information that you're exposed to sets the foundation of your understanding of that subject unconsciously. So even if you're told later on it's 99.9% safe, it doesn't make any difference because you filed it in your mind under dangerous disease. And it's the feeling that you make decisions from, not the logic. And advertising knows about this, and that's why we've got so much rubbish in our cupboards and our fridges and everything else, because we generally buy by emotions. Now, this is really key. The two books I'd highly recommend to understand this. Persuasion is very key and subliminal. Persuasion is about the first instance that we talk to someone is absolutely key. If we don't get that part right, it doesn't matter what else we do. So to really understand that. So obviously we want to smile, we want to feel relaxed, we want to do all these things. So let's just have a little look at how they manipulated people's decisions and how they drove them to do what they did. And I think we went through a bit of this in our last presentation, but effectively they wanted everyone to take the jab. Bill Gates wanted 7 billion people jabbed, okay? So then they built this pathway, okay? So then Joe's on this particular pathway. How can they get Joe to move from A to the jab? They've got to get him feeling emotions, forces, and feelings. How do they do that? They used fear, guilt, shame, anything else. So basically what they do is they build a driver. The driver builds feelings and emotions, and that builds motivation for Joe to move. And then they only give him one pathway. It's the only way out was predictive programming to build a single pathway. If you've got a second option, which is early treatment, what do you now have to do? You have to think. If you have to think, you're going to probably look at some data, you're probably going to look around, and then you're going to actually start thinking. They didn't want people to think, so they created the only way out. They removed early treatment, they removed prior infection, all of these things, saying the only way out is the jab. And then everything was built around that to build pathway A to be painted with Teflon and pathway B to be painted with sludge or even hidden. And then pathway A, you know, you get to go shopping, you get to go on holiday, you get to change your Facebook profile, you get to not be excluded from society, all of these things. So all the propaganda was about pushing Joe down pathway A. Okay, the really key point about understanding this, if you stand in pathway A and say, don't go down this pathway, what do you represent? You represent the person or the thing standing in the way of Joe protecting himself or his granny. You become the problem, okay? This is why force doesn't work in this aspect, because you don't have enough force to stop Joe going down there because the government and the media has all those resources. So what we need to do is we need to enlighten Joe to the information so that Joe takes a different pathway of his own accord, okay? Now, people think that we're mainly conscious of our decisions. It turns out so much of our decisions is made from all the unconscious information that we have. And I'm going to show you why that's the case. So there's 3 aspects of our behavior, of our mind. We've got the conscious mind. We've got this animal part of our mind, which kicks in when we're threatened or when there's, you know, something that's challenging us. And we've got the map. The conscious mind is rational planning, strategy, thinking, calculating, etc. This unconscious animal is automatic, it's safety, it acts on feelings and emotions, it doesn't have language. If you get chased by a tiger, you're not going to reason with the tiger, your gorilla is going to kick in, it's going to try and protect you. We often trigger the gorilla when we're having conversations, and you know what happens because the other person just turns into an animal, or we can get triggered ourselves. And it's all because what's in the map defines meaning, stores programs, memories, and knowledge. So here's an example. If Joe is successfully convinced via his map that masks work and they protect you and other people, Joe is going to look into his knowledge in his map and go, oh, mask work, I'm going to put one on. Then if Joe sees another person not wearing a mask, looks into his map, they're selfish and they're threatening my safety, then his gorilla gets triggered. And that's why he's going to be an unreasonable arse, and he's going to be, he or she's going to be rude to you and call you all sorts of names, because the gorilla is not rational. In a conversation, if you're talking to the gorilla, it is pointless. You've got to talk to the rational mind and affect the map. Everything is about getting information into the map. If Joe thinks that 2 and 2 equals 5, no amount of rationalizing will get him to think anything else. You've got to show Joe new information. And the best way to get information into the map is stories and metaphors and experiences. And that's really the key. I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. The change that people make is when the map changes. So people that have gone from trusting the institutions to realizing some of them can't be trusted is the change that made all the difference. What triggered that change? It was usually an experience or a story or a piece of information that they saw, they were shown. They're often not told. It is possible to be told, but it's very rare. Okay, so what are the drivers that forces people to move, to behave? And when you understand these 5 basic drivers, and this is from Mark O'Leary at Stanford, I do believe, it really is incredible to then see it so clearly why people respond the way they do. We have 5 basic needs. We want to be socially accepted. We want to be part of groups. We want to influence others, make a positive impact on the world, and really fit into society. We want to protect ourselves and safety. That is the fundamental basis. And we want to bond to a partner. If you look at these 5 basic needs, you can see how these were manipulated to force us to comply. If you didn't comply, you were rejected from society. That is traumatic. Social exclusion theory shows you, like thousands of years ago, if you were excluded from your tribe, it possibly meant death. So this is a very big fear in people. People don't want to stand out. This is why a lot of people wore masks, all these things. This is why they said, if you don't do this, you're selfish, etc. It was all this socially accepted. People changing their Facebook profiles, standing apart from it. It's to fit in and to be socially accepted. The media and the government pretty much are setting the terms and conditions for what's socially accepted or not. And that's what's in Overton's window. It's really key to understand this. Part of groups, if you don't get this, you can't go to your sports club, your bingo, your church choir, whatever it is. They forced people to take the jab, otherwise get excluded from their groups. Obviously, they used the it's safe to protect yourself and others, and they used the guilt. So you start to understand why people were driven to do things, but also what we're looking at next is why in conversation you will trigger these deep needs, okay? And we're going to look at a couple of examples. So I'm just going to briefly pause there. Is there any questions that people have on that section? Okay, we're good to keep going.
Yeah, no, so but I just said brilliant so far. I really recognize I've been playing ping pong with people all the way through.
Yeah, that is the key. Literally stop playing ping pong. Teresa.
Hi there, thanks a million, it's great so far. My question is, my understanding is that it's very difficult for the rational mind to talk to the emotional mind. So if I'm coming from a rational place and someone is planted in their emotional mind, it's 2 different languages. So how can I,
Absolutely.
get them to switch back to the rational?
Yes. Well, the thing is don't get triggered yourself. That's the first thing. And don't try and rationalize with them. Listen and allow them to sort of express the emotion to a certain degree without sort of denying it, etc. Now, what happens is when people do that, so let's say, and I've had this loads of times, someone will get angry with you. Pause. Don't send the anger back. Politely ask them, for instance, someone said to me, oh, I'm not listening to your conspiracy bollocks. In a real angry way. Paused. Okay, may I ask what was conspiratorial about what I said or what I shared? And then you'll get this thing now where there's this sort of vortex that they can move into. And what usually happens is they will apologize. because anger is an emotion to lash out at that which is threatening you. What happens is that when you start to understand there's a deeper level, you stop triggering the animal. And that's what you ideally want to do, that you actually won't get people angry and all these things. So you might want to at times for various reasons, but generally it's to not step in the ring is the greatest thing I can do you, because what they want to do is they want to step in the ring and have a metaphorical boxing match. But if you refuse to step in the ring and you support them and allow them to feel what they're feeling without judgment, it will subside very quickly. Okay, so hopefully that answers a question. I can give some examples of that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, but yeah, very, very key point that Therese made there. You can't rationalize someone that's experiencing emotions. Okay, it does not work. And that's what so often people try to do. For instance, I remember the supermarket, the first lockdown, and the lady behind that, I wasn't thinking much of it at the time. She goes, "Oh, I'm petrified." And I was like, "Oh, what?" She goes, "Of this virus." And if I'd have said, it's only a 99 point blah, 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 whatever, it wouldn't have made any difference because facts don't affect feeling it directly. What I said to her was, "Oh, actually, it turns out that the chances are like the equivalent of a drive to work, because what happens is that affects the map, and then the animal looks at the map, because that's what happened. To talk to the map is via stories and metaphors. And when you do it that way, their information updates, and then the animal doesn't see the need to kick in. That's the key." Okay.
David, before you continue, could you just tell us the titles of those books again, please?
Which books were they? Which was the Persuasion and the Subliminal. So the pictures are on the screen, so you can obviously look at the recording. Let me just quickly pop back to them. Okay, so you've got Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. He wrote the seminal work on influence, which was the science and practice of influence. But this new one's brilliant because this shows you the first thing you do in interaction really much sets the frame and is so, so important. And this book, Subliminal, is really, really key because you'll see so much of how people have been influenced is beyond their awareness or their knowledge. And really that has to be brought into their awareness, and then they can take back control and power. So they're just two of a couple of books that I would recommend. Now I'm just going to flick through to where we were.
Thank you, David. That's great.
You're welcome. Okay, so what we're going to do now is a couple of examples of avoiding shutdown. So if Joe turns around and calls you a conspiracy theorist, if you respond, call him a sheep, what you've done is you've both socially rejected each other. Okay. Now, it's very easy to get triggered when someone does call you a conspiracy theorist, an anti-vax, or any of the other pre-prepared scripts of nonsense, but finding a way not to step in the ring is absolutely key, because the whole propaganda, the whole thing is about pitting two parts of the public against each other. So the person doing the pitting is not part of the picture. So if someone does call you a conspiracy theorist, as I mentioned, what did I say was conspiratorial? You're really just politely questioning what made them say that. And usually it's because you've gone outside of Overton's window. So what you generally want to do is stay within the window initially and gently pull things into the window once you've got, common ground and, a really good communication going. If Joe says, "Why don't you get the jab?" and we go, "The jab is dangerous," we are effectively threatening Joe's safety metaphorically. Yeah. And of course, he's not going to respond to that very well. So this line of questioning is not the best to go down because it's too confrontational and they will get triggered. So if you are asked this question, you could say, you could ask them, "Oh, so you want to protect yourself and others, but if it didn't stop protecting others, could it be a choice for me?" So you really do achieve a number of things here, because you can start talking about it doesn't stop transmission. And if you do this in a really gentle way, you can really enrich Joe's map. And then he's like, "Oh, well, that's not the basis I can make the decision on anymore," because the whole of the vaccine passports and everything else was obviously on shaky ground because it really didn't have any logic about it. So then you could say, "Well, I'm not sure how effective it is." Going down the effective route is definitely much better than the safety route, because the effective is really, if it works or not, is really, not that important compared to safety. Safety is obviously much more key, but much more triggering because it's the basis of what the whole propaganda was based on. So here's a typical thing that would go on. If that were true, it'd be on the news. And then if you use corporations' influence, do you have proof? Yes, hundreds, can I show you? And then they will get abusive. When anyone asks you for proof, usually they don't want proof. They just want you to go away. Yeah, so a lot of the time it's a trap. When they ask you if you have proof, you can respond, well, if there was lots of information, would you reassess your opinion? So what you're doing is you're pacing and you're getting them to commit that they will actually do something with the information. Because a lot of the time, this question is really just to get you to go away. So role of emotions, absolutely critical. As we looked at, all the manipulation was really the drive of emotion. So we really want to understand it. So it's the elephant in the room. It's the least thing that most cultures look at. Now I'm going to show a picture on the screen, and there's a good chance that it's going to trigger a negative emotion in you. Okay. Now, a lot of people find the mask very symbolic, very emotionally charged. Now, I used to have really a lot of anger and rage when I saw the mask. I thought it was absolute nonsense. And then one night I realized it was probably blocking my communication. So I used a lot of EFT, which I'll explain later what it is. But effectively, I looked to resolve these emotions. I went out the next day and I took my dog for a walk. And then something startling happened. On my journey, a number of people wearing masks come up and talk to me and start stroking the dog. And that hadn't happened once before then. So people subliminally, as in the book it will explain, could pick up my prickliness around people wearing masks. So it really prevented any communication. I don't think masks are good. I think they're absolute nonsense. But if you don't have the emotional charge, people won't feel it. So then it becomes a fact and an opinion rather than an emotion. People respond to emotions. This is why it's really key. That's why the divide and conquer is so powerful, because if you're trying to talk to someone that you have resentment or anger towards, they will feel it. That will categorize you as the enemy or the opposition, and they will dismiss everything you say. That is why divide and conquer is so powerful and is the go-to for tyrannical governments and people that want to create conflict. Divide and conquer is powerful. Okay, so ways to resolve emotion. Obviously, I mentioned EFT. The Sedona method, I think, is just profound. I use this a lot with one-on-one clients. Letting Go is a great book. And if you want a bit more advanced, you start looking into breath work. But any one of these can have a profound effect on your life. It has on mine. The Sedona method has just improved every relationship with my family. And it frees you from the stuff. So what caused people to act the way they did was the emotions. And people that know what's going on are still experiencing those emotions. And a lot of it is preventing us from being effective. I'm not saying that the anger is not justified. It so is justified. What I'm saying is it's not practical. If we want to get back control and power, we want the world to work better than it is now, we have to transmute those emotions into positive. So we're calm, we're rational, we're able to accept what's going on. It's not easy. It's the biggest challenge. But when you do it, it will be, in my opinion, the biggest effect that you will have in your communication. And so many of the success stories are when people was able to let go and are able to communicate. Really is so important. I can't stress that enough. Emotions buried alive do not die. What's forcing people to get booster after booster after booster is the fear. If the fear wasn't there, they'd have no drive. It's what's so key. So we made a video, it's on our YouTube channel. It's Clearing the Communication channel. You effectively do this. You draw you and you draw someone you want to communicate, and you work out what's blocking it. When you clear what's blocking it, it is profound. Even if they're doing the blocking, it tends to shift it on both sides. Very, very powerful. So that's the emotional aspect. And now we're going to look at bridging the divide, which is really this overcoming this divide and conquer. So what we have is a story, very powerful story from World War I. What happened was at Christmas 1914, they had a ceasefire. I think it was because, and Robert Sapolsky, who's a Stanford neuroscientist, talks about this. He said they had a a ceasefire, because I think there was too many people in no man's land, so they couldn't kill each other easy enough. So the German and the British soldiers went out into no man's land and they started recovering the bodies. And then something profound happened. They knew there was a ceasefire, so they started helping each other bury the bodies in the icy ground. And then they started realizing, you know, that the German soldier, the British soldier is not the enemy now, they're another human being. So they really got the humanity back. And then they started exchanging details about talking to communicate after the war. And then quite magnificently, they had a game of football, which is so bizarre. 2 days earlier, they're trying to kill each other. And what happened was, once they had orientated to the other person and not to this label, the label is the key, the caricature of what a German or British soldier would be. And what happened was, at the end of the ceasefire, they didn't want to fight anymore. It's not inherently in people's nature, in my opinion, and many others, that we do want to kill each other. It's only when we're threatened that these things happen, which is why the propaganda to do this is key. So what did they do? The officers went in and threatened to shoot anyone unless they started fighting again. And that was the only way they could get them to fight. Now, after the war, certainly after the Second World War, what we saw with some of the actions was quite startling. So people like, Stanley Milgram and Henry Tajfel wanted to understand what made people experience conflict and prejudice and do some horrible things. Now, what was incredible about Tajfel's studies is that he set up all different groups, and he was trying to understand what were the elements that created conflict and prejudice. Was it color, creed, culture, all of these things? And what he found out was actually quite startling. There was no baseline. What does that mean? There was no inherent characteristics other than a label. Once you have a label, you've got two groups. What happens is the people then identify with that group, and then what you do, you compare your group to another group. This is why they use conspiracy theory, anti-vaxxer, all of these things, because what happens is, once you've classified a person into a group, the person then assumes all the properties of the group. You see them as a whole, as not an individual. So when you refer to anyone that's done anything as a sheep, you're effectively hypnotizing yourself to see everyone the same. And this is why they want people called anti-vaxxers or conspiracy theorists, because, and I've asked scientists, the pro-narrative scientists about this, like, so you can only be pro-narrative or an anti-vaxxer. You can't ask questions. It makes no logical sense. And it's set up because it's very unconscious that people will not realize the error in classification is one of the biggest issues and errors that we make as human beings. So how do you do this? You get over it by breaking the caricature, and it's relatively straightforward once you know how. You just question it a lot of the time. So someone will go, you're an anti-vaxxer, and you can just say, well, what is an anti-vaxxer? Is it someone that asks questions? Can I have questions and not be? You just get them to start defining it, and then it starts to crumble. And they have to concede that it's okay to question things. Yeah, and if you do it very politely, what will happen is they will stop seeing you as the caricature, and they will start to talk to you as a person. This is what we need to do in terms of dynamics. If Jane and Joe see each other as in opposition, everything subliminally and unconsciously will set up the table that way, and you will play table tennis, no doubt about it. What you want to do is to get to this, where you're on the same side. I have literally used those words. I remember being at the Vax Center with some of the lawyers, and someone come up because his daughter had been jabbed, and someone had told her it was unsafe, so he was very charged. He had the same name as me. I said, look, David, I'll be polite and respectful. I know you'll do the same for me, but can I just say we're on the same side? He went, what do you mean? I said, well, you're here because you care for your friends and family. That's why I'm here. So I've connected on principle, and then that changes everything, because no longer does he see you or she see you as the caricature of what the media tells you they are. And particularly, if you stay rational and calm, because they want you to be mad, they want you to be angry, so they can fit you into a nice box. Okay, so this is where we get this different perception, that if you are considered on the alternate view, the fact will bounce back. And there's many reasons that the fact will bounce back, but that's one of the big ones. Okay, so just going to again take a brief pause for any questions about those three. So there we had how not to trigger shutdown, the role of emotions, and getting to common ground and avoiding divide and conquer. So do those three make sense for anyone, and any questions around those?
Feel free to put your hand up and ask a question. Paul, do you want to unmute yourself, my lovely?
That's it. I've got the clap. Can I just put, okay. Can I just share something that happened to me this week, which is very, very good. This week I called Nathan. Nathan is in our dance group, and Nathan has been giving me a lot of bad things, you know, since the beginning of the pandemic. And, you know, it's continuous from Nathan. Nathan this week has just come out of 3 weeks of being COVID plus, and his family has as well, because he lives with his mum and dad. I rang him up on Wednesday night just to see how he was. And this is what he said. Just keep in mind, Nathan has been like this for the whole pandemic. You know, he's everything, he's at me all the time. And he said, Paul, I've just realized something. You and Carolyn and Sandra and Patrick, you're not vaxxed, are you? And I said, no, we're not. I've just realized that you're not sick, that you're never sick. I just realized that you've never tested positive for COVID. He said, that's right, Nathan, I haven't. And he said, how come you don't test positive for COVID and I have? And I continue to test positive for COVID. And he said, please tell me the truth.
Wow.
He said, and this is the man that's been like this at me for 3 years, you know, total abuse. And I never got mad at Nathan. I let him abuse me. And okay, he comes around and says, Paul, tell me the truth. I want you to tell me the truth. I said, okay, Nathan, I will. The reason is because the COVID SARS-2 and COVID SARS-1 is on the vax. That's why you are testing positive all the time. And that's why I test negative, because I don't have COVID SARS-1, COVID SARS-2 in my body.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Now, what you did inadvertently, Paul, is you showed him by your actions and what everything else, and he was able to see that by not pushing it in his face. Yeah, you see how powerful that is. That's really, really a good story. And what you're going to see is it's going to get easier and easier the longer this goes on, because the more and more the lies are obvious.
But but Nathan came, he come to his conclusion, not mine.
Exactly.
He's come right around. I never forced him. I took the abuse. I ring him up to ask him how he is, and he asked me to tell me the truth. And I said, and he said, thank you, Paul. Thank you for telling me the truth. And now he's gone to tell his family. And what's happened now is he's actually he's backed away a bit. But I had to let Nathan come to a realization that he's been lied to.
Yeah.
And you realize that now.
Yeah. Now that's the key, Paul, because people have to come to their own realizations. And what we're talking about is when we do have conversations, how can we nurture that process? Because in fact, a lot of the time in the conversations, we slow it down. It's almost
a long time.
Yeah, yeah. But we can actually really speed it up with some real nurturing of that. But yeah, great example. But you showed him, you couldn't tell him. Nothing you said. Yeah, that's really key. Nice story, Paul. Okay, so shall I crack on?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Right. And you're going to see a lot more of that going on. And this is where we need to be humble as well. The worst thing we can say, and obviously you didn't do this, Paul, which is really good, I told you so, is never something we should do. It's always we've got to support them. Imagine realizing you've been lied to, you've taken something that's not only useless, but potentially harmful, these things. It's a disaster. This is where we've got to be very caring. Yes, we have every justification to be rude as hell and all those things, but an eye for an eye. That's really, Gandhi was very clear on that. An eye for an eye is not the way to go. And I know some, and with that, there's a lot of people that do belong in prison. There's a lot of people that should lose their jobs. People that have responsibility, people that knew they were lying, all of these people, yes, they deserve their comeuppance. But a lot of the public have had the greatest psychological manipulation done on them. And when they realize that, there should be apologies, but we can't really demand one. Oh, certainly, I think we could justify demanding one, but it won't work. Okay, so this is the obstacle course. So we've looked at not triggering shutdown, we looked at emotions, we looked at avoiding divide dynamics. You literally cannot talk to someone unless you have common ground. You've got to find the things that you communicate with, because otherwise they see you as the opposition. And we ignore everything an opposition says. Okay, so we're going to now look at pushy salesman, cognitive dissonance, show, don't tell, and continue this theme of avoiding shutdown. Okay, these are the conditions we want to create. We want to move to principle if we have a difference of opinion, because at principle, generally, we agree. It's only really the dodgy communists that really want to have everything. Most people want fairness. Okay, so let's look at pushy salesman, train wreck, which is a cognitive dissonance, triggering disrespect, and the show, don't tell. What is pushy salesman? It's effectively the evangelical approach. Oh, you've got to look at this. I'm going to send you 7 videos. You need to watch them all. Right, we've all done, or certainly I did that more than most, but so many have done that. It does not work. It triggers a thing known as reactance. If you're too forceful, if you're too pushy, a part of the brain shuts down. It says, hang on a minute, someone's trying to change me or influence me. I don't like that. Now, this is like walking into a shop. You want to purchase a product, but the person is too pushy. You want the thing they have, but you probably go somewhere else. It does not work. It's understandable because it's driven by anxiety and the importance of what we need, but it's not practical. So we really need to cultivate it. To work on the emotions of anxiety and fear will really dispel this a lot. Next, cognitive dissonance. This is really, really, really one of the most important things. What is cognitive dissonance? And of course, I have to be honest here. I had to watch one of the videos about a dozen times before I really got it. But it's really simple. And of course, once you get it, it really does make a lot of sense. Cognitive dissonance describes the discomfort experience when two cognitions are incompatible with each other. So it's basically, two thoughts that don't match. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute. But first, we're going to look at a video of, it's only 30 seconds long, of Jordan Peterson triggering the positive form of cognitive dissonance. Most of the time we trigger the negative. So it's very interesting the way he does this.
It's done by new information without conceding or adjusting your perspective. Take, for example, Kathy Newman, after she'd asked Jordan Peterson about why he feels that he has the right to offend people in the pursuit of truth.
You're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. And exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me.
But you haven't sat there and
There it is.
I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Ha, gotcha.
you have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head. Yeah. It took a while.
It did.
So she was trying to justify that Jordan Peterson mustn't offend people. And he said, but in the pursuit of truth, you often need to offend people. And he said, and you are in the pursuit of truth, maybe offending me. So then he's pointed out the dissonance, and he did it in a very clever way. Now, there's two forms of dissonance. There's dissonance that gets triggered when you point out that someone has two views inside their own head that don't match. That's the dissonance you want to trigger. The dissonance you do not want to trigger is when your information is different from their information. Because if they get a choice, the two choices are change their information or dismiss what you're saying. And who wants to guess what the easiest one to do is? They're going to dismiss what you're saying. So anytime you present information that differs from what they currently believe, you run the risk of it being dismissed, particularly if you present it in raw form. If you wrap it in a story or an experience, it has much, much more chance of landing. In fact, Jerome Bruner showed, I do believe it was 22 times more chance of getting through than a raw fact, which is quite startling. So let's just have a quick look. So we have all heard or seen this. Without vaccination, my symptoms would be far worse. This is an example of advertising. This is what's known as predictive programming. This is laying the tracks to really give someone a script to how to think about something. So I can send a link to that video in an email. It's really Jordan Peterson's interview with, I think, Kathy Newman. So dissonance, effectively what that senator, I mean, he was probably paid to say that, but the average person will have this experience. They caught COVID, but the jab is supposed to work. That creates dissonance. So now Joe has experienced dissonance, and the brain does not like dissonance. It has to find a way out. It feels very uncomfortable. So the two exits to get out of dissonance are, it would have been far worse, and what are the influence forces that take you down that pathway, or the jab doesn't work. Now, the media has removed this, so most people's option is, well, it could have been much worse. Now, this has been done so expertly, so stealth, that people are just writing a script. It's literally like watching an educational video. They're not thinking, okay? What happens is that dissonance forces you to think. So they've literally managed people's ideas and they've told them what to think before it happens. This is why we need to expose so much of this. They have weaponized cognitive dissonance time and time again. They did it with the masks. What they said was, if you don't wear a mask, you're selfish. So it pits the two ideas against each other. You don't want to be selfish, but you don't want to wear a mask. What's more important? Not to be selfish. If you didn't fall for that one, then they mandated it. Now that was even worse weaponization, because then you've got, well, I know it doesn't work, but I have to wear it. So then what happens is you change your belief around it working, but you do it unconsciously, because you don't want to look stupid by doing something that doesn't work. This is so incredibly powerful because people are moving their belief systems slowly. That is why a number of people have become fascists over the last 2 years without their knowledge. In the document Mindspace, it talks about this. Mindspace is a government document. If you Google Mindspace and Gov, it comes up as the first thing. In there, they show you the 9 major ways that the government uses this information to manipulate the public. On page 66, they say if the public finds out about this, they won't be happy. And on page 67, they say when people find out they're having their identity manipulated, they will be, problematic. So the fact that we can have our identities manipulated is a very important point. Okay, so just to sum up on cognitive dissonance, it's a belief, a thought, or a self-image that does not match another belief, a thought, or a self-image. You can use this for good. You can say to someone, if you saw something and it didn't look right, would you want to look into it? Yeah, it's a leading question. Well, yeah, I'm going to look into it. It starts to bring that empowerment back to them. So there are positive and ethical ways to use this. But it's really got to be to empower the person, not to control them. It's a real key distinction. So in summarizing the last piece now, really, before we get onto the show don't tell, there's just this dignity, self-respect. And if you look into Donna Hicks's work, which is fantastic, it's effectively, the worst thing we can do is to reject an experience. How does it feel when someone does not give us dignity, self-respect, and these things? It's one of the bases to trigger us the most. Gandhi, when he said an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, is someone rude to us and agitate and have a go at us. If we return that dignity violation, we're just doing what they're doing. We have to take the higher ground. Yes, we have every justification, and at times we may want to, but it's not practical. So the 10, I'm not going to go through these now, I'll just list them out and you can have a look at them afterwards. But it's really, these are the 10 key things from Donna Hicks's work. people, and this, because it's so key to have their identity accepted. This is why we're getting this identity politics and this gender stuff, is that people have been told stories that are not strictly true, and because it becomes part of their identity, it becomes very problematic. So yeah, these are really to dignity and self-respect. Okay, so the next thing is show, don't tell. You cannot show people, you cannot tell people most of the time, but you can sometimes show them, even if it's by demonstrating what you do. Yeah, as in the instance of Paul, he showed, just by being what he was doing, the other person was able to see it. Now, I did a number of things where I'd go to someone, I'd say, oh, ivermectin's good, it's blah, blah, blah. Get dismissed every time because I tried to tell them. But when I took a different approach and I showed them via story, so I said, I relayed this story. So there's 82-year-old John Swanson. He's on a ventilator. This true story, by the way. It was in a magazine news article in Las Vegas, in the Nevada Review, I think it was, or Desert Review. So 82-year-old John Swanson, he's on a ventilator. They've given him days to live. The family wants to prescribe ivermectin. The hospital refused the treatment. Already the person listens, why would they refuse? He's got a few days to live. They've got nothing to lose. The lawyers took it to court. They won an injunction. They then flew in a doctor. They prescribed ivermectin. It saved his life, and it prompted numerous other court cases. John Swanson was then at home. I think it was a week later. Ivermectin is widely used. It's got decades of safety, but here's the thing, it's only $2 a dose. So is there someone blocking cheap drugs for profit? Is that a potential motive? Now, when I told this story, people would say, oh, where can I get this? This story talks to the unconscious mind. It talks to the map, okay? And even if they're not complete, they then get curious. Here's the thing, when you talk to the map, you can't not affect the map. It literally will just start to disrupt things. But when you talk directly to the conscious mind, it doesn't make it into the map. This is why Plato said, those that tell the stories rule society. That is why stories are so key. Linda Cron in her TED talk on this shows that stories are absolutely massive, and it's the emotions that are key to behavior. We think we're logical creatures. It's a bit of a misunderstanding, because every single thing that drives us has an emotion or a feeling component. So that's really the key aspects. We have a checklist on the website. If you go under resources, there'll be a checklist where you can go through the elements you want to have a conversation, what you've done, what you may have need to look at. We've also got an article in there, the do's and don'ts of conversation. What you've seen today effectively is, in its raw form, is 2 2-hour workshops that we run, and we have exercises and all the things. But today really is, this condensed information dump for you guys. So in summary, the 3 things: conversations, messaging, how we're influenced,